Why?
Nothing. No, nothing. Nothing.
Make fun of me for enjoying a little bit of ice in my whiskey?
No, not at all. It really unlocks the flavor.
It does. That nice watery Irish flavor. So, Jason, happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yes, Kyle, it is St. Patrick's Day.
It is at the time of recording.
Yep.
We're sitting here enjoying the sun still being out at 5 p.m., no longer wanting to kill ourselves.
68 degrees.
Yep, life has meaning again. We're
Yep, short sleeves.
enjoying some complex 110 proof Irish whiskey.
Refill pretty soon.
So I suppose we're going to be talking about some equally refined, complex music. Yeah.
Yep.
Are we talking about the new Rammstein video that came out?
No, so I actually meant to tell you, I listened to the song, but I have not watched the video yet.
Oh, that's it. Well, we can cover that.
Yeah.
Are we doing like a jazz fusion artist?
If you would like to. I don't think we are today, though.
Are we doing Daft Punk career retrospective?
Not yet.
What are we doing?
The new Ghost album, Impera. Oh boy, yes, this will be a fun conversation, but I'm glad we're talking about it because over the years, I'd probably say the last decade or so, that Ghost has been a thing in popular music and pop culture just in general, and always on the periphery of the metal scene, which we'll talk about. I've kind of wanted to have a Ghost conversation with you, and I feel like this is good because this has kind of forced the issue, because typically, unless we were trying to cover, contemporary modern music in this fashion, and we're kind of locked into this format, it really wasn't going to happen. So I am looking forward to this conversation. So thank you for joining us today as we talk through the new Ghost record, Impera, which I believe came out, was last week, right?
March 12th,
March 12th,
2022.
yes.
The year of our Lord.
Yes, so been almost sitting with it for about a week now, listening to it, digesting it, analyzing it where appropriate. So we're going to talk about it and give you our feelings, and I'm sure Kyle's going to tell you about his feelings about this record.
I've got a couple of them.
Couple two tree feelings. So
before I get into that, what did you think of the new Ghost album?
Well, what I think is really interesting, and that's why I'm glad to have this conversation with you. There's two very different perspectives in the monodome here tonight. I think we have someone who is not a fan of the band and listened to this record coming in as not a fan of the band, and then you have someone who is a fan of the band, and myself, coming into this record. So I think it's interesting. It's a lot of expectations of the individual listener, and that's what I'm curious to hear, what your expectations were as not a fan of the band, but someone who gave the record a chance and listened to it, versus someone like myself who is a fan of the band and also kind of had certain expectations, and to kind of see how those were maybe met or not met or whatever. So truthfully, it's weird because upon my first listen to this album, it wasn't really doing it for me, at least as a whole. And it was funny because I've given it probably, I'd say, maybe 6 or 7 listens at this point. And the songs are stuck in my head. I've woken up the last few, you'll appreciate this, I've woken up the last few days, and our dog sleeps with my wife and I, sleeps in the bed. He's a little min pin, little guy. And I've woken up and I go right over to him and I grab him and I go, Kaiserion!
How embarrassing.
Well, no one sees it because Jess is sleeping, so it's just really between Luke and I. Luke's our dog. But it's funny, the songs I found have kind of had that staying power, sticking power, at least for the last week, in terms of just being in there. And who knows if that's going to be the case 2 years from now, 5 years from now. Hard to say, but there is that weird subliminal element to a lot of the songs, and I think the ways that they were constructed, I think that's obviously, in my opinion, was done with intent. But, it'll remain to be seen. I think Ghost, and this is kind of the crux of where I'd like to go today with our discussion we're going to have, but Ghost, to me, has had a really interesting trajectory from where they started on that first record on Opus Eponymous, and where they kind of find themselves in 2022, both critically, commercially, in terms of the sound, in terms of kind of what they're going for. So I think on one hand, is it where I really saw the band kind of progressing from those early albums? No. But do I think it's where the band wants to be, and where, Tobias, old Toby as I like to call him, wants to be as a songwriter or as a performer or whatever? Absolutely. So I think he's heading in the direction that he kind of wants this project to go in. Whether or not it'll have longevity is kind of up for debate. But so as that, I don't know. I'm on board. I didn't hate the record. It's gonna take a little bit longer, I think, to digest more to see where it stands in their discography. How about you, Kyle? Let me get my whiskey.
I thought this album sucked so hard. And so I guess before I get too far into it, let me explain my relationship with Ghost a little bit, because it's easy to write me off as somebody who doesn't get what they're trying to do, or maybe hasn't spent some time with it. And really, I don't think either one is true. I've listened to most of their albums all the way through. This particular one I listened to 3 or 4 times all the way through, trying to get it right. Because there have been bands out there where they were doing something and I just was too dumb to realize it at the time. Cynic was that one of those bands for me. I saw Cynic, I think, 3 times live before it finally clicked, and now, I love most of the stuff they do. So I have tried to give them a chance on multiple occasions, so it's not for lack of exposure, I'll say that. It wasn't like I heard Secular Haze once and then wrote them off completely, even though that song does suck donkey balls.
No, continue. So let me say my piece. So
sure.
I want to.
So, equally, there's going to be a lot of people who I think, what are the instantaneous defenses of Ghost? Oh, just because it doesn't sound like they look, it's like, well, no, like, I get that aspect. Like, I love pop music. I love all kinds of music that put up some type of guise to draw people in and then switch the script out a little bit. I can appreciate that. So it's not that element. It's not the homage to genres and bands and musicians of yesteryear, because I do appreciate that as well. I think what it is the fact that this band, and I shouldn't pin that on everybody in the band, Tobias Forge continually puts out music that is not so much a subtle tip of the cap to previous genres and artists as it is blatantly ripping off other people's music and doing it much, much worse and making it much stupider with every incarnation. You can see the progression of the albums from, I forget the name of the second one, Infestissimum.
Yeah, Infestissimum.
Yeah, like that. Okay, I get you like spooky 60 Sabbath type of stuff. Cool, if that's your thing. It's not my thing, but I get it. Why the fuck in 2013 do you have an album that sounds like it was recorded inside of a dog's asshole? like there's paying homage, and then there's making.
Man, wait till you see what the studio rates are for the dog's asshole.
Right.
They charge hourly, or
Yeah, I mean, like I don't get it, and it's frustrating and I'm not gonna hate on any members of the band, because if you're a working musician and you're out there making money in 2022, more power to you, man. But I will say, in terms of just sheer stupidity, this album may be the album of the year for me.
All right. Well, right on. Yeah, so, I mean, I will have to say, I'll preface this whole conversation by saying this. As I listen to it, I think you come out of that intro track, because there's a few little, as there have been on previous Ghost records. If you're new to the band, which I'm sure at this point not a lot of people are. Everyone's at least heard one Ghost song, right? Everyone's heard Square Hammer at this point. But on the records, they'll have these little instrumental interludes. They're usually like a minute long or 30 seconds long or something like that. And the record starts with one of those, right? And then it goes into Kaiserion, which the very first thing you hear is this like, ah, right? And the minute I heard that, I'm thinking, Kyle's gonna fucking hate this album. I think I was literally sitting there at my house on the couch. I had I was playing it on my stereo, and at the Spotify release, right, 11 o'clock usually, and that was kind of my first thought. So and I'll be honest with you, at first glance, I didn't really care for that song either. And it was weird because more so on this record than I think the previous records, and that was my point in our intro, more so on this record, it's been very subliminal for me, where I've found that it's stuck in my head after the fact. And that usually doesn't happen to me a lot. Typically, I'll kind of know like a song when I first hear it, if it's going to stick or have staying power or not. And a lot of this, specifically with like the singles, I wasn't very impressed with the singles, the pre-release singles, especially like Call Me a Little Sunshine and Hunter's Moon. And especially with Call Me a Little Sunshine, it's funny, I found that song has really grown on me. I actually really like that song a lot now, whereas I didn't when it was first released. So it's just kind of interesting to me. That being said, yeah, so if we go back, okay, so I think that's, interesting on your side of the argument, or at least your thoughts on it. You go back, and they obviously have that very kind of niche, or at least it was, that niche theatrical thing. And I think I really enjoyed that era of the band where there was still that degree of anonymity before Tobias got kind of found out with the lawsuit and all that stuff. I don't know if you know the history behind that, but...
I do.
Yeah, so the 10-cent version for our viewers is that, Tobias Forge, who's kind of the main mastermind of Ghost, and if you asked him, always has been, was sued by some of the former Nameless Ghouls a few years ago. I think this is before Prequel came out in 2018. Basically saying that it was a rights thing, and, et cetera, and it went back and forth in the Swedish courts. And ultimately, I think was either ruled in his favor or settled or whatever. So he kind of, at that point, was unmasked, as it were, and then has kind of lived this duality now where, he's doing interviews as himself and everything else like that, but the band is still very much, if it's done on behalf of the band, it's very much still this masked theatrical sort of concept, right? And I think that prime era of the band is probably right around, to me, like, Infestessimum, but more so Meliora. Meliora is still my favorite record of theirs, and I'll die on that hill. I love that record. I think it's a great modern record in any genre. But that being said, I think it was cool because there was that mystique. For whatever reason, they were able to pull that off for that first, almost decade of the band, that people really didn't know who any of those people were. I mean, they kind of had inclinations that, this might be this guy, he kind of, looks the same, whatever, or has the same, figure or whatever like that. So it was kind of thrown around, and that was interesting. But I think you saw right around that period of Meliora where really Prequel and then Impera now have really just kind of seen this turn towards the big kind of arena rock, like AOR sound, even more so than those early records.
Sure.
And I would argue, they were never metal. They were never a metal band. And I know that's where a lot of kind of and that's not an argument we're having, but that's, where a lot of, I think, the criticism of Ghost comes into play, is a lot of the metal purists saying, well, he looks like King Diamond, but listen to the music, it sounds like Scooby-Doo chase music.
Well, and to that point, you could make the same argument about Kiss, right? Kiss looks much spookier than they actually sound. And while I'm not a Kiss fan, and there's nothing groundbreaking about Kiss, you can at least say that in terms of originality, they were probably the progenitors of that.
Yeah. I think, that's the thing. So, like, my entry point into Ghost was Infestessimum, truthfully. I didn't really... I recall the buzz around Opus Eponymous in, like, 2010, 2011 when it came out. I recall that buzz. I recall going up to Three Floyds, which, may it rest in peace, at least the brew pub, right? But we spent a lot of time up there, and I remember being up there, like, right around that era, 2011, and them spinning the vinyl and thinking, what the hell is this? Like, it was interesting, to me, because this was different. And there's obviously a lot of talk kind of around the band in terms of their look and that mystique and all that, and are they really evil? Are they really Satanists? Like, what's going on here? And it was cool. Yeah, it was different, and I think a breath of fresh air, and that's why I enjoyed that era of the band. And then, it kind of fell off them for a while. Their star continued to rise, and I remember getting into the album Meliora after the fact. It was after it had already been out for a while. I didn't listen to it the day it came out. I was completely on the outside, I guess you could say, throughout that whole album cycle. And then it was probably maybe a year after it had come out. It was the same thing. I think I was cleaning the garage or something like that, and I put it on and listened to it, and it was like, whoa, like I really like this a lot. I forget, it's like He Is, or it might have been like From the Pinnacle to the Pit that I heard, and it just really grabbed me, and then I was kind of on the train again for a while. And I remember Prequel will always be special album for me because it came out like the week that I got married in 2018. So, my wife and I it was a doomed kind of attempt at a honeymoon. We traveled, and, we were only maybe 2 hours away from where we live in Indiana here, and went to see them, and it was a great concert. It was kind of a bigger theater show. They weren't in arena mode yet, and I got deathly ill, like the worst stomach flu you've ever seen. Yeah, I remember telling you about that. So it's funny. I always kind of tie in a lot of those singles from that album, like Dance Macabre and Rats and all those things, because they'd come out right around the time we were doing all of our wedding planning. And then, I remember getting like the sickest I've ever been, like literally sleeping on the floor of a hotel bathroom because I couldn't get up. I had this bad stomach flu, and that was we were listening to the record on the way out to the concert, and then got sick at the concert, couldn't stay to the end, went home the next day, cut the honeymoon short, and then we got home and the air conditioning was broken at home, so we were on our fake leather couch, and it was 90 degrees in our duplex, so that was fun. So there's a lot of nostalgia around that record, but it was funny because I feel like Prequel, to a lesser extent, I felt the same way about a lot of those songs, at least initially, that there was something missing from what I really enjoyed about Miliora. And it was like, okay, yeah, I like the singles, etc., but then I found over time that record really grew on me. And now I really enjoy that record a lot. I have it on vinyl, I've got it on all different formats, we'll spin it occasionally, and obviously there's a lot of nostalgia tied to that album, specifically for me and my wife, so, that's kind of that. But I found that going into Impera, I kind of had the thought, at least, that it was going to turn out to be the kind of record that it is. And I say that in terms of being a Ghost fan. That's the problem, right, with any art you create, and we're kind of in that boat too. You create art, and you as an artist, whether it's, ill-intentioned or whatever, I guess that's another argument, whether or not, it's a rip-off thing or it's like actually the artistic vision. If you're really following your own muse, you're going to do whatever you want to do. Maybe you're going to write the best death metal album ever, and you're heralded as this death metal visionary, and then the next record you want to do is a folk record, But that's really where your muse lies, and that's what you want to, channel or whatever. Whether or not it's disingenuous, I feel like Tobias Forge wants to be playing big arenas. He wants to have that sort of draw and this vehicle, that he's found, and for whatever reason it worked out, it's the goofy Scooby-Doo,
Well, here's the thing, though. It was the goofy Scooby-Doo thing in 2013, 2014. I think it's something different now, and you could argue something more nefarious, really, from a music industry standpoint. Because what is Tobias Forge really good at? Is he a powerhouse singer? No, not really. Is he this crazy multi-instrumentalist? No, I wouldn't argue that. Does he have little snippets of phrases that get stuck in your head? Sure. And I think either he or somebody at the record label is smart enough, like, hey, you alone doing the Annihilator type of thing isn't going to work out. Like, let's get some people who actually know what they're doing to help you out with this record. So, case in point, I guess this is as good of a time as any to get into the personnel. The official personnel listing is Papa Emeritus IV. Fuck off, that's so stupid. And a group of nameless ghouls. In reality, you have Frederick Uckison playing guitar on Spillways and Call Me Little Sunshine. Great choice. Frederick kicks ass at whatever he's doing, and he's a great guitar player.
That's interesting, too. Does it say on there, is he anywhere else on the record? Because there's a few solos later on in the album that I could have sworn...
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm reading this incorrectly. This was citation number 34. So I think he played. I think you're right. I think he played guitar.
There's a few, and if
album.
you gave it a few listens through at least, which more power to you. I appreciate you giving it a chance. I think that there's a few solos in there where it was like, oh yeah, that's definitely not Tobias Forge playing that solo. There's a couple that are very like, for lack of a better term, shreddy. Try to describe it in a better way, but some really just tasty lead playing for sure.
Absolutely. You've got Klaus Alland on production, solid track record. You've got our boy Andy Wallace doing mixing for this, as we covered in our Mudvayne video. So, in terms of the negatives with this, right? This is proof you can polish a turd to some extent. You have an all-star production and mixing cast. You've got the top guys in your genre in terms of playing. So the album sounds like a million ducks, right? The playing on it is fantastic. The production is really good. Vocals, my personal taste, don't like them at all. But what happens if you strip away all that stuff? What happens if you get rid of the world-class production and the world-class players on there? You have a mediocre Dokken tribute band that wants to write their own songs on this album specifically, and I do feel like that's different than the first few albums. I dislike those for a different reason, whereas those maybe weren't executed as well. You could argue that, unoriginal as it was, they had some degree of consistency with their sound, right? It sounded it's difficult to put it into words exactly, but it sounded like a band writing a song rather than an Axl Rose type of figure trying to write an album and then hire people to come play it. Does that make sense at all?
No, I get it totally.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because I think for me, and I wanted to touch on that, so I'm glad you brought it up. I think from what's the best way to put this? So, to our viewers, Kyle is very much, and I would say without a doubt, much more into kind of modern music than I am per se. I have an appreciation for pop music, for R&B, for jazz, but I'm not as up on or into, I should say, and just for full transparency, a lot of the more contemporary styles as you are. And I know musically, for a lot of your pursuits, that makes sense too. So a lot of the times you'll turn me on to things, or you'll kind of be able to, show me production stuff. Hey, check this out. This is really cool. And it's interesting because I definitely, whereas I'm not into a lot of that stuff, I'm certainly very into and up on what's kind of current in the metal scene, or hard rock, or progressive music, or, contemporary music in that fashion. Not to say you aren't either, but, that's kind of more where I spend a lot of my time. So I think one of the things that I like about this, and maybe that's me looking past how derivative some of it can be.
Sure.
I enjoy this type of production, and these types of productions, I should say, like the different elements you're seeing in a lot of these songs in kind of that hard rock context, because I feel like you don't really see that a lot. So to me, I don't want to say it's like the Blinders factor, but I think there's maybe some of that going on, because I love how big a song like Call Me a Little Sunshine sounds, or like Watchers in the Sky, or Watcher in the Sky. Like, it just sounds huge. And in metal, specifically a lot of the metal that I find myself gravitating towards on like the day-to-day, or even hard rock, you're not really seeing as much of that. A lot of those sounds and a lot of that vibe tends to be kind of that synthesized sort of, oh, I've heard that kick drum sound before, and I've heard, that guitar sound before, or that's a plug-in or whatever. So I do like when, a band or an act like this kind of has that money to throw around and has that pursuit of that style or sound that they want. I think another example I would use, and this might not be a band you've ever dug into, but Night Flight Orchestra, which is another kind of, that's a collab between pretty much all of the Swedish melodic death metal bands. I think you've got Bjorn Strid from Soilwork singing on it.
Oh, okay.
You've got Charlie D'Angelo from Arch Enemy playing bass on it, and doing a bunch of other stuff. And it's very much the same thing. very much in pursuit of that AOR yacht rock 70s 80s sort of thing. Like, it's fun, it's party, you know, we're rocking out, having a good time at the arena on a Friday night in the summer in 1985 or whatever. Sure. And it's like, I enjoy that too, and it's kind of a similar thing. The production tends to be really big, and there's just a lot of like, fuck it sort of stuff. Like, yeah, I'm going to have my horn part in there, and I'm going to do this. So I enjoy that, and I enjoy seeing it in this context.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying you're wrong and I'm right necessarily there, but I think for me personally as a listener, I enjoy that element that they bring, whether or not it's original.
So I think two things that I'd point out on that are interesting and warrant discussion. So that type of thing, the whole, what was the song that came out in the 80s? It wasn't We Are the World, it was the metal version. We're Stars, that's it.
Oh, yeah.
That type of thing, what you're bringing up as well, that's none of those cats' main act, right? That's something where you know they're throwing it together, they're having fun, and you can kind of appreciate it for what it is in a guilty sense. I get the genuine sense that Tobias Forge thinks his shit doesn't stink, and he's totally bought into himself from the interviews I've watched with him, from the overall aura and everything. I think that's a guy who more or less doesn't have a funny bone in his body and is super serious with everything. And for me personally, that's pretty lame. I could be completely off at that. I'm sure Tobias will cry himself to sleep on his bed of $100 bills and Colombian schneef powder, but like, I mean, you know where I'm coming from, right?
Yeah, sure. No.
I think the other thing is, you know, you say, okay, well, Kyle, you're into pop music. What about Bruno Mars, right? 24 Karat Magic is an album that you could definitely argue is derivative. Silk Sonic, the band, is another entire act where you could argue it's the same derivative type of thing. And I could definitely see how you could argue that, but I would disagree in a couple key things. So, Bruno Mars and, by extension, Silk Sonic and Anderson .Paak, they are definitely living a little bit more in that realm than people just, you know, subtle tip of the cap, wink to the audience type of thing, like, oh, here's what we're doing. Yeah, they are firmly playing something in a genre of music that was popular several decades ago. And where I think the difference is, anything you play from Bruno Mars or Silk Sonic sounds like a Bruno Mars or Silk Sonic song done in a type of style. There's still that core contribution to the musical lexicon that you can pick out from that, and I don't get that at all from Ghost. Plus, with Silk Sonic specifically, are they aping that style a little bit harder than most other acts? Yeah, I think so, but by the same extent, they are not taking themselves super seriously. They're taking their performances absolutely seriously, and we'll talk about this album as they release more singles under it. But they're taking their performances really seriously, but they are silly in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way that would be obnoxious if they weren't so fucking good at what they were doing. And I feel like therein lies the difference between a Bruno Mars and a Tobias Forge.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, you know, it's weird. I mean, it's there's not many albums, generally, I would say, that you and, or bands, acts, you know, however you want to look at it, that you and I, like, would, like, firmly disagree on. Like, most of the time, we're more or less a Venn diagram.
Sure.
You know, and there might be certain styles that you delve more into that aren't going to be styles I'm going to follow you into. I can appreciate the musicianship or the songwriting or the production, but it's not going to be something that I'm going to listen to on my ride home from work every day, you know.
Sure.
But it's funny, yeah, that I would say Ghost is one of those few, like, line in the sand bands where Kyle is firmly over here and I've firmly been over here. And even with this record, for maybe taking it in a direction where I'm not 100% on board with it, or I'm not super enthusiastic that this record is kind of what it is. I still dig it. It's sure. and you know, and that's no apologies. It's not a like, oh man, Kyle's not going to be my friend now because I like Ghost or whatever. Like, I never thought that. I remember, I think it was years ago, I sent you a video of the song Majesty off Milior, and I was like, dude, this is sick, check this out. And you were just like, exactly the same conversation that we're having now, which is funny that, and I think that's that consistency there that like I think you found those elements of the sound or of the band or whatever that you weren't keen on way back then, and that has not changed for you, and they've not won you over. But I think for me it was the same thing as it's weird, like there's certainly many bands and acts that I can point to that lost me at a certain point. I can go back and say, I'll try to think of an example off the top of my head here.
Lepers?
Yeah, Lepers is a good example. So, Lepers lost me probably after Cole.
Sure.
And even on Cole, it wasn't like, like Tall Poppy Syndrome and Bilateral. Holy shit. I loved it. Loved it. Still love it. Great album, especially Bilateral. Awesome. One of the best modern progressive metal albums, I would say.
I would agree.
But then they kind of lost me because they went after a different sort of sound or a different sort of dynamic. To an extent, it's funny, but Haken was like that for me. And I've kind of gotten back into their sphere now. And funny enough, the album that did it was Vector.
Interesting.
Their shortest album, but I found that the songwriting was really tight and it pursued sounds that I kind of enjoyed, and it got me back on board to where I at least checked out Virus. I didn't like Virus as much as Vector, but it was like, okay, yeah, I'll check them out again after years of not really being too enthused with what they're doing. Ghost is one of those weird rarities for me to where I found that I've always checked it out, and even if I'm not necessarily like blown away, like Impera didn't blow me away, but it is stuck in my head and I don't hate it. So It's the same thing too. What I say Impera is a 10 out of 10 record. Like right now, critically, if you go through the blogosphere and all the other, metal websites and hard rock websites and magazines, it is just absolutely getting all sorts of praise. This is the second coming. It's great. 5 stars, 10 out of 10. I wouldn't say that. I would, as a fan of the band who does, appreciate what they're doing or appreciate the difference in sound that I think, the band is bringing to that 2022 market or audience, whether that's derivative or not. Again, that is the penultimate argument around Ghost, right? And it's always going to be, no matter what direction that band takes. I think, to me, I finished mine. I think, to me, I'm always on board. I'm always on board to at least give it a listen, to check it out, to see what direction they're going. I would say the only moment on this album, if we're talking moments, and I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to do my highlights and lowlights.
Sure.
I love, not so much a specific song, I guess I would point to, but I love a lot of moments in some of these songs. Like I love the chorus and like the pre-chorus to Spillways. Again, very derivative. I guarantee I've heard that somewhere, but I just enjoy it. I don't know. It's catchy. I enjoy the instrumental section in Kaiserion with where it kind of changes the feel up, and there's that cool synthy keyboard solo guitar kind of interplay thing. I like that a lot. I enjoy Watcher in the Sky. I think that's a catchy as hell song. I've really come around to really liking Call Me Little Sunshine. Just that chorus to me, good on you, Toby. The one thing I just cringed, and I know, right? It's an album, me cringing at this album. This is probably the one where
I'm waiting for it because I think I know what it is.
Well, maybe not. The Darkness of My Love. It's like that is where, to me, it crossed over into the threshold of being like something where I wasn't on board for a minute, and that's where it's got like the Ed Sheeran acoustic guitar in the chorus. Da-da-da, da-da.
Interesting. Okay.
That was like almost too modern to me. Like the minute that it was like, oh, this really could be on the radio, that's when I was like, I don't really like this song. And then I thought it ended strong with Griftwood and Respite on the Spitalfields. I enjoyed that song for what it is. I don't think it's their best closer by a mile, but I enjoyed that song. Yeah, to me. So, Darkness in the Heart of My Love, or whatever it's called, that was the one song on the album that I couldn't really get behind. And again, I know it's different because this is an album and a band that you don't really care for, so I'm talking about the one I didn't like on the album that I liked that you didn't like, so it's kind of funny. But like to me, yeah, that was just the one moment where I felt like he kind of pushed it too far. And it's funny because, we talked a few minutes ago about Tobias and the fact that I think you said, you're perception of him is that he thinks his shit doesn't stink, or that he, is the man, or is this great songwriter or showman or whatever like that. I've like read some interviews and watched some interviews with him too, and there's actually a few quotes of his or things of his that I really kind of appreciate as far as his ethos on songwriting. So one of them, I should say, that I really like is he talked about seeing the band as, it's his box, right? That's the sound. But every record trying to take those chances to see, like, well, what can you fit in that box? Or what are the boundaries, I think we were just talking about that before we started recording about Horizon Forbidden West. And one of the things that I was trying to do is walk. If you played that game, it's awesome. But my God, it's a huge map. So one of the things I've taken to doing in my play sessions lately here is I'm trying to walk around the edge of the map to see where my boundaries are, so that way I can kind of fill it in as I'm exploring or doing side quests or whatever. And I tie that in here because that was what Tobias said, is that he's trying to see where the boundaries are at, and I think you would argue maybe nefariously in terms of how far can he push it. Can he do that radio song? Can he do that weird pop crossover to where it goes a bit too far, where even the fans that have stuck with him, who maybe when he was a curiosity from the kind of proto-metal days back on Opus Eponymous and Infestessimum, have still stuck with him through the hard rock and then the transition into more of the pop realm and this real shiny, polished arena sound that he's had on Prequel and then even more so on Impera. What's going to be that? Is it going to be that next album where he puts out the full-blown, like, I don't know, I couldn't even name some contemporary or some Billie Eilish sort of, where that's going to be where people are going to go, oh no, man, sorry, I'm jumping off the train? Or is that going to be the moment where he really blows it up? They have 3 million listeners. He has 3 million listeners on Spotify right now. Is that going to be what puts him into 10 million listeners, or is that going to be what loses all those listeners? It's just really interesting to me. But, that I think gives you at least a peek into what his thought process is. So that's the first quote.
I will say, in theory, in a vacuum, that quote makes sense. I would agree with it. I would also argue that somebody like, who's another figure like that, Axl Rose would probably say the same thing. And you can listen to their latest EP, Hard School, which I think is a step above this most recent Ghost record, and see how well that plays out. Second, I would love to see it if Tobias Forge tried to write a Billie Eilish record, because it might be good then, but continue.
The next quote, and I think it's interesting because I wouldn't apply this to his music per se, because I think I like the idea here, and it's certainly had an influence on me in my music and my writing, because I like the idea of this. Basically what he said in an interview is that when people look to him, this was right around the time where, like, he was doing I think it was the Pope Star EP. It was after Meliora came out, right? And that's when, okay, they won a Grammy, they're starting to have some success, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea was, when pressed, like, hey, why don't you write more songs like Pinnacle to the Pit or Mummy Dust, or like the heavier stuff? And his answer to me was interesting because he said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, I already wrote Mummy Dust. I already wrote Pinnacle to the Pit. I already have He Is. So the way that he kind of breaks those up is he thinks about the songs in terms of how they're going to be performed live, and then thinks about them in terms of, okay, well, that's a scene or that's a color in this palette, and that's how I'm thinking of it in terms of the live show. So it kind of always kind of comes back to, okay, well, how is this going to come across live? How is this going to sit on an album? And I don't want to necessarily rewrite the same song I already have because it fulfills those parameters of what I wanted it to be. So again, too, not necessarily applying that to his music, because I think especially on Prequel and Impera, there's starting to be a lot more stuff that sounds the same, whereas on those early records there was a lot of differentiation. I feel like there were a lot of songs where, okay, sure, that song sounds different than this song, sounds different than this song, whatever, okay, fine. So maybe post Meliora that's not quite the case anymore for his music, but I like that as kind of a guiding, ethos, I guess you could say, for writing. For me, I think, okay, well, working on this album, well, I've already written that song. I don't want to write that song again. So how can I differentiate my process? So
Sure.
to me, I've taken that to heart, and I try to anyway, to where I'm not repeating myself. If it's anything, I have a hand in writing. But, just, I guess, two things I wanted to bring up there. But yeah, in terms of lowlights, definitely that song I just wasn't on board with. I also think that the interludes were used to less effect on this record than they were on previous records.
Sure.
I could buy them a little bit more on the previous material than I could on this. They don't really serve a purpose to me on this one. But highlights, I think just consistently, it's very polished. It's got that high gloss sheen, and it is catchy for what it is. And I did appreciate that about the record. Again, though, this will be kind of my closing. We'll see if I feel the same way a year from now.
That's fair. See what stands the test of time.
Yeah. So I would recommend this record. I know, I probably know from the other side of the room what the answer will be there, but I would recommend it. I would recommend it to check it out. I don't know if I would treat this as the entry point into the band, though. I think this is kind of a further polarizing release for someone that maybe was on the fence with this band. And it's interesting to me because then it'd be a whole other topic of conversation, but they just got done doing a tour with Volbeat. And that was another band where 10 years ago, I loved Volbeat. I saw them in concert 3 times. I love those first 2-3 records, and I still do. And that's, again, a hill I would die on, just like Miliora. But now, not so much. That's a band that, okay, if we wanted to talk about what we talked about earlier, like with Leprous, that's a band that lost me after a certain point. I don't listen to them after, I think it was Above Heaven, Beyond Hell, or whatever that record was. Love that record, I still do. I put it on a month ago, and it still holds up for me. But after that, I don't know, man. It's just too goofy, But it's the same band, so what happened, right? I think that, that's a whole other argument there, but very similar, like, whereas I would say the entry point to that band should be some of those earlier records, I still think I would give those earlier Ghost records a shot before. I think if you wanted one record that kind of encapsulates what they do and them doing it right and at the top of their game, it's Milior. I think that's a great record. But I think from just a sheer, in my opinion, songwriting and catchiness perspective, Opus, I think, is a great record. I still think it holds up there, too. But give Impera a shot, at least to hear that sort of like glossy, high sheen production in 2022 on a hard rock record, I think, or a rock record just in general. Not to say that there aren't folks that are out there doing the rock sound in a more original manner, but I think it still has that degree of, it's sugar, man. It's a pixie stick, That's that's the way I look at it. It's a lollipop,
Sure.
So yeah, that's where I'm at with it. What do you think, Kyle? Highlights, lowlights, and recommend.
I think we're fairly aligned in what the highlights are in the record. The production, playing is great. Can't take any fault with that. Working musicians trying to make a buck and get their name out there. Respect.
Anyone else has ever had that issue? I know tons of people try to do, video with iPhones, right? So
it's an iCloud storage thing, is what it is. So, but anything.
You got like a terabyte of dick pics on your iCloud.
Mm-hmm.
Just gotta let some of them go, man.
Yeah.
For you, I could see it being like dick pics and shit pics.
Well, you know what it is.
You got the whole alphabet just spelled out in turds, and you just can't let it go.
Well, you know how like sometimes the resolution on something is, or not even the resolution, but something is so far in the background on a picture, you have to zoom in and take a screenshot and then zoom in again. It's like 3 dick pics, but it's like 5,000 pictures of that.
Oh yeah, just because you have to.
Yeah. So
lowlights.
It would be funny enough of me just to say the entire album, but I don't think that. I do think the transitionary songs were boring. I think the whole album is boring, but I think the transitionary tracks were pretty boring. For me, the cringiest moment on the album was 20s. Between the delivery, the stupid lyrics in there, the overall vibe of the song,
I will say this. I like that song. But it's interesting to me because, just as a brief aside, I remember when they released that song, like maybe a month ago, right? The internet blew up about 20s, and it was, wow, this new sound. And I'm thinking, has no one ever listened to Diablo Swing Orchestra? Because, in my opinion, Diablo Swing Orchestra is a great band.
Has nobody ever listened to Caribbean or Indian or Persian music?
Even like mixing that sort of rock or metal element with that sort of vibe, that swing vibe or whatever, the right, the reggaeton, sort of like Caribbean music vibe. Like, again, I like 20s, but Diablo Swing Orchestra was doing that 20 years ago.
It's nothing new, right?
And I know, that's a band that has a lot less commercial appeal than a Ghost because they are full in it. Very similar to a lot of those avant-garde metal bands that still exist and did exist in the early 2000s. A lot of bands we listened to. I think Unexpect and, Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum, not quite in that sort of realm, but just with that experimentation factor.
Yeah.
They're never going to be as commercially successful as a band like Ghost that kind of tries to do all these different things and arguably either does them well or doesn't do them well. But just the fact that song was singled out as like their contribution to the music scene in 2022, I could kind of almost see, I could take the Kyle view of that and really look at that as being derivative in almost like a rip-offy way. Because that is a sound that has been done before. So with hearing a band like that, and again, too, that's our crotchety old metal man platform, right? Hearing a band like this that's in the spotlight, that's kind of aping that style to some degree, knowing full well that I can go point out, a record, a DSO record from 20 years ago where they were doing that and doing it better.
Yeah.
And they didn't get the recognition for it.
Well,
it does bum me out a little bit.
Well, and I'm not one to really pay a whole lot of attention or place a lot of importance to lyrics and everything, but I had to, because I listened to that song for the first time in the car on the way to a gig, and I had to make it a point to go home after the gig and look up the lyrics to make sure what I was hearing was correct. Because my nose started bleeding listening to it.
Yeah.
And
listen up, you motherfuckers. He'll be grabbing them all by the hoo-ha in the 20s. But I mean, I don't know. I always laugh whenever that, like, I'm smiling when that song's on. But again, I guess this is different. It's not me, like, sitting there, like feeling like cringy for them. It's like it's cringy, but I don't know. It's weird, man. I couldn't tell you why I give this band a pass when so many other bands, especially lyrically, because you know me, you're not necessarily the lyrics guy, especially in our music, but I am the lyrics guy, very much so. And if the lyrics are like my own lyrics are cringy or stupid, or if it's a band or project I'm involved in and the lyrics are cringy or stupid, I usually take offense to that or have some problem with it or be like, okay, hey, how can we maybe tweak this to where, but this, I give it a pass. So I don't know. Is that an inconsistency with me as a musician, whatever? Probably. Thanks, buddy. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So overall, would I recommend this album? No. I would not. Although I do think, because part of my quandary has been like, okay, who is this band for? Who is it catered to? Like, who's really gonna? Why are you fucking looking at me like this, right?
Who's it for? Just ban that on the thing.
So, like, who is this band for?
Midwestern slacks wearing,
right?
Like millennial.
Who is it catered for? And as you put that Venn diagram, like, where does the overlap take place? And like, much in the same way, like, oh, if you're a fan of this band, check out this band, whatever. I tried thinking of that, and I did come up with a few. So, you will like this album, and probably Ghost in general. Don't fucking give me that look, man. I already see you.
Alright, sorry.
If you are a fan of Roland Emmerich, if you think Stranger Things was the greatest TV event of the last 20 years, if you think The Big Bang Theory is hilarious, if you remember Guns N' Roses from Hollywood Rose, and if you think all the best music ever created came out when you were in high school, I would recommend this album, but otherwise it's for no.
So that was pretty much all of the internet that you just qualified. So for better or worse, I would say 2022. So I wonder if we can go negative views on this video.
we're gonna try today.
We're gonna try.
Yeah.
I like that though. But well, I will say this in closing. I know I said closing 5 minutes ago, but in closing, I would say I'm glad that we had the conversation, the ghost conversation.
Sure.
I feel like we probably never have to talk about ghost again, which is a plus, because I certainly know whenever we're on a car ride, we're heading out to Sweetwater, we're doing something like that. If you give me the aux cord, I'm not going to put on Ghost. Although I do enjoy it in the confines or the comfort of my own home or car when I'm by myself. Knowing full well, there's bands that you wouldn't put on either, right? I know that this is not a Kyle thing. And I respect that now. And I think I respect now more after having this conversation a lot of your reasons for it, if I didn't before. So sometimes it's good to disagree. And it doesn't necessarily, right, it's a lot of, I think the wider world just in general, you can still disagree and, have a lot of other things in common and overlaps, and at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, hey, you agree to disagree, so I think that's good, healthy discourse, but, we'll see, man, maybe the next record they do is going to be some, crazy, technical, progressive death metal thing,
Maybe we'll hire a songwriter next time.
I'll just leave it at that.
See you, everyone.
Thanks.